Let's talk about what led to Luger being there. In the August 14th edition of The Observer, Meltzer would report that the main event for the first Nitro is supposed to be Hogan versus Paul Orndorff. And, of course, this changes, and Orndorff isn't in the main event. And he may have been considered for one of two reasons. One, to recreate his very successful run with Vince that did big business opposing Hogan a decade before. Or two, to capitalize on the dirt sheet buzz that Paul had for his backstage fight with Vader. So let's cover that for a minute. In August, WCW has a TV taping at Center Stage where Big Van Vader and Paul Orndorff get into a backstage brawl of sorts. Orndorff at the time was working as an agent. Vader shows up late. Paul thinks this is Vader being disrespectful. They have words. Vader says he was doing a photo shoot on orders from Bischoff, and everyone knew he would be late. Apparently, they were running late on interviews, and the day was running long, and they needed Vader to do this interview right then, or they'd have to go into extra expense for the crew. So depending on who you believe, Paul cussed Vader and called him a fat-ass prima donna. Vader acted like he was going to do something about it and pushes Orndorff down. And then Orndorff allegedly knocks Vader out with a single punch from his bad arm. And Paul's bad arm is from an injury where he never got it fixed. In the 80s, it caused the arm to atrophy. And allegedly, Paul is fresh out of the shower here and wearing shower shoes, like flip-flops, when he punches Vader. So the legend has grown as time has went on that you've got an older star in shower shoes with a bad arm who knocks out the biggest in-ring bully WCW had at the time. And in the end, WCW sided with Orndorff and suspended Vader for the incident. Now, that's all the rumor and innuendo, Tony, but you were probably there. So set the record straight. What really happened?
I'll tell you exactly what happened because it happened right at my feet. Right at my feet. We were doing interviews on the set at Center Stage.
With Gene Okerlund.
With Gene Okerlund. And Paul was one of the agents. And Paul was trying to round up guys. I don't think Vader was late. I think, if I remember correctly, and I think I do, Vader, they couldn't find him.
I see.
And we needed him to come out. I don't think a concern about interviews running long and paying the crew extra to do it, because the crew was there all day to do whatever we needed to do. I don't think that was a concern. So the microphone is open, an interview is over. Paul comes out with a sheet, and it's supposed to be Vader, and Paul says, "I can't fucking find him, fuck him," or something to that extent. "We'll do something else without that motherfucker." Okay, but he may have said prima donna. So they started to do something else. Paul comes backstage, and I'm standing there. There was a room where we did our meetings, and Paul was standing there, and he didn't have his shower shoes on. He was working clothes.
Okay.
And Vader came up and pushed him and said, "You motherfucker, if you got something you got to say to me, you say it to my face." Well, when he pushed Paul fucking clocked him, threw him down, got him down, and fucking was stomping his head into the concrete. Stomping right on top of his head. And Vader was saying, "Get him off of me. Get him off me." And Paul was just stomping the fuck out of him. And I remember guys getting around and pulling off. And I remember Kevin Sullivan saying, when they finally pulled him apart, Kevin Sullivan said, "Let Paul go." I remember he saying, "If you don't let Paul go, Vader's going to take a cheap shot while you're holding him. That's what kind of guy he is." And they finally pulled him apart, and Vader was bleeding. So one punch clock to knock him down. Not so sure that happened. He may have just taken him down. But once he got him down, he was stomping the back of the head into the concrete, or stomping his face into the concrete by stomping on the back of his head. Eric wasn't there. Eric had heard so many things, and this was before we all had cell phones. So there was a payphone back there. Eric said, "Let me talk to Schiavone." And I told Eric exactly what I just told you, although it was probably a lot fresher in my mind. And he said, "So Vader instigated this." I said, "Oh, yeah, Vader's the one that shoved him and challenged him." So that's how it all went down. And I don't know if I'm proud to say, but I can tell you it happened right there in front of me. And there were no shower shoes. The photo shoot could have been. I don't think it was. Vader just was roaming around there and they couldn't find him. Because, running these guys down has always been a big problem.
Right.
And the bigger the arena, the tougher it is sometimes to find them. You can tell guys, you got interviews at 4:30, be there. They're still not going to be there. That's just the way they were. And that's why agents were assigned to run these guys down. Vince had it really pretty much choreographed. But that was what happened then. I think the Orndorff Hogan thing probably was as much to garner the excitement of 10 years ago and the great run that they had, because it was tremendous.
Yeah.
Paul Orndorff and Hulk Hogan, that split screen cage, who got on the floor first, was a tremendous angle, a tremendous match. And I think they were trying to pick up on that. I'm not so sure if they were booking for the dirt sheets or not back then. But
it's come out in recent years that Vader has said that he was drinking a lot at the time and not being himself. And Orndorff has also admitted that he could have handled it better. But either way, it was a mess that ultimately results in a lot of things changing, because all the rumor was Vader was slated to beat Hogan on the second Nitro for the world title to give people the impression that this is the type of show where anything can happen and they're going to run hot angles and it's not just going to be squash matches. So it wasn't meant for Vader to be the WCW champ again, which means that it kind of seems strange, but he never won the big gold belt.
Yeah, and this may have been the last straw with Vader, because I know, as Leon said, he probably was drinking a lot at that time. He was at times difficult to deal with. Not me, but difficult with the agents. And the guys in the business, difficult to deal with. I can say this, without a doubt, he got his ass kicked that day. Paul Orndorff beat the shit out of him that day. And it's a moment that I'll never forget. And so I can see this kind of being the last straw, because Vader was difficult to work with. And I think, admittedly so, after what you just said.
So in September of 95, WCW sends a cease and desist to the WWF, claiming Vader's under contract and any contact would be considering tampering, and they may just be trying to get the jump there. Yeah. He wasn't on the first Nitro, and they started the second Nitro making mention that Vader hadn't completed the necessary paperwork and had gone AWOL. And this is 1 week after Luger had jumped ship and debuted on the very first edition of Nitro that we're talking about today. So it sort of works out like it's a bit of a trade of sorts, with Luger coming to WCW and Vader going to the WWF. I know that's not exactly how it happened, but who would you argue got the better of this trade, if it really was a trade?
Well, I would argue that that WCW did.
See, I think everybody would disagree with that and say that
really?
That Vader going to the WWF was a bigger coup.
Well, that is probably an opinion from a fan basis.
Yeah.
And I'm just doing an opinion from a front office basis.
Sure. No, I get that.
Okay.
And this is 1 week after Luger had jumped ship and debuted on the very first edition of Nitro that we're talking about today. So it sort of works out like it's a bit of a trade of sorts, with Luger coming to WCW and Vader going to the WWF. I know that's not exactly how it happened, but who would you argue got the better of this trade, if it really was a trade?
Well, I would argue that that WCW did.
See, I think everybody would disagree with that and say that
really?
That Vader going to the WWF was a bigger coup.
Well, that is probably an opinion from a fan basis.
Yeah.
And I'm just doing an opinion from a front office basis.
Sure. No, I get that.
Okay.
So anyway, here's how Luger fits in here. It's reported at the time that whole brawl happens, that it leads to renewed negotiations with Luger. Meltzer had put it out there that Bischoff wasn't high on Luger and had only offered him $1,000 per night without a contract. And in fact, Bischoff himself says he only agreed to meet with Luger out of respect to Sting, who had requested the meeting, and they didn't want anybody to know. So the meeting actually happens in Sting's garage because they don't want it getting out. Bischoff said of Luger, quote, "Between his lack of talent and piss-poor attitude, I had no interest in him whatsoever. Bringing in a guy like Lex Luger, A guy who, in my opinion, did nothing but bitch and complain and was a marginal talent at best. Just didn't make any sense to me, end quote. But then, of course, this fight happens at center stage, and WCW starts to scramble. One of the early ideas, as we mentioned, was to have Vader in the main event win the belt from Hogan on Nitro, and that would really set up their War Games pay-per-view. And now with Vader's situation, they start to reconsider the stance on Luger, and it frees up a bunch of cash. So Bischoff says he signed Lex for only $150,000, a number that others have disputed. But there's a promise that if it went well, he would revisit that. And it's worth mentioning that Luger is leaving a roughly $500,000 a year gig with the WWF when he makes this jump. So Vader is persona non grata on TV for WCW beyond pre-recorded TV commercials for Fall Brawl and stuff like that. So to kind of recap, Vader goes from being the featured big push, title win, main event on Nitro to now they inform him he's fired on the 11th of October, with the official reason being that his 90-day review window had passed and he was medically unable to wrestle because of a shoulder injury. But everyone kind of knows it's because of this incident with Orndorff. Do you remember the shoulder injury, Tony?
No, I do not. Now, let me go back here. You say everyone knows it's because of the fight. Everyone doesn't know. You guys who followed the dirt sheet knew, and the guys in the wrestling business knew. But I think the regular fan did not know.
Oh, yeah. I'm just saying when they list a thing on there saying, oh, your 90 days thing passed and you can't wrestle, that's a bullshit answer. The real answer is, hey, you're hard to do business with. You got in a fight with Orndorff. Get the fuck out of here. That's hard to put on a form.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But the shoulder injury, you're talking about Vader's shoulder injury?
Yeah, it happened at the Bash of the Beach in 1995. There was a cage match against Hogan there in July. So a couple of months prior to that, or I guess a month prior to that, he was trying to do a shooting star press, but he said Hogan was too far out and it was a messy fall. So he hurt himself, but just continued to work through it with pain pills and booze. That's not a great combination.
No, not for someone his size and his demeanor, it wasn't.
And when he was suspended without pay, he was supposedly making $750,000 a year through March of 99. Bruce has disputed that amount before on our WWF show on Vader. Do you think WCW was actually paying Vader $750 in 95?
No, I do not. I can't think anybody south of Hulk Hogan was making that amount.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where they got that one from.
Well, Vader's out there doing shoot interviews and keeping that story going, but now you've heard it from both sides. That doesn't appear to be the case.
No.